Back to the basics. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sources, check. And thick skin, check. Let's go. We are getting very, very close to hitting 10,000 subscribers, so I want to thank everybody that's hit the like and subscribe button to Golden Blue Dude. You guys have blown me away with your support. We're expecting to get to 10,000 subscribers either by tomorrow or Saturday, so we're actually planning a live show celebration on Sunday, probably around the neighborhood of 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So come join us for the live show celebration on Sunday. One of the biggest rumors that was flying around after USC and UCLA announced that they were joining the Big Ten was that Notre Dame was now interested in the Big Ten. The Big Ten was pursuing Notre Dame. Maybe they could add Stanford to entice Notre Dame even more. It was thought that one of the reasons why the Big Ten brought USC and UCLA was to entice Notre Dame, another rivalry for Notre Dame that would be within the Big Ten. So it's thought that the Big Ten was heavily pursuing Notre Dame and that Notre Dame was actually going to join the Big Ten. I was one of them. I was like, there was no way that Notre Dame was going to turn down that type of money, because right now the Big Ten is pursuing a $1.5 billion contract through Fox, and I heard that if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten, that contract would actually be bumped up to $2 billion. Yes, that's how much value Notre Dame would bring. So I was thinking, man, there is no way that Notre Dame would turn down that type of money. And plus, the Big Ten is a pretty good conference. It's believed that the Big Ten and the SEC will be the two big conferences that gets to whatever number they're looking for, either 20, 24, whatever. They will split off from the NCAA and create their own playoffs and national championship. So it made a lot of sense that Notre Dame would join the Big Ten. But after talking to Notre Dame fans, digging into the history books, and looking at that ACC contract that Notre Dame has, I actually think that Notre Dame will never join the Big Ten. Surprised? I know I was. Let's get into the reasons why Notre Dame will never ever join the Big Ten. Number one, the number one reason why Notre Dame will never join the Big Ten, Michigan. Yeah, that's right, Michigan. The number one reason why Notre Dame will never ever join the Big Ten. Michigan and Notre Dame, a much bigger rivalry than what I anticipated. And it's not just in football, that spills out into real life. Turns out that Michigan hasn't treated Notre Dame very nicely for a very long time. We're talking over 100 years ago. Michigan has treated Notre Dame very poorly for a very long time, and Notre Dame hasn't forgotten about it. It has been generations and generations, and Notre Dame fans pass it on to their kids, and their kids pass it on to their kids, and it is an embedded rivalry. It is an embedded hatred. Michigan is most definitely a reason why Notre Dame hasn't joined the Big Ten and probably will never ever join the Big Ten. I'm not going to go into the history as much. You can Google it, but Michigan is a real reason why Notre Dame hasn't joined the Big Ten. The next reason, the Big Ten has actually turned Notre Dame down in the past. Now, this was long ago, and then the roles reversed, and Notre Dame has turned down the Big Ten over and over and over. But it is a fact, there for a while, the Big Ten did turn down Notre Dame, and Notre Dame didn't like that. That's one of the reasons why they haven't joined the Big Ten. You make Notre Dame mad, they don't forget about it. Just ask Michigan. I just talked about Michigan. So yes, one of the reasons why Notre Dame hasn't joined the Big Ten is because the Big Ten has turned them down in the past. The next reason why Notre Dame will never join the Big Ten is Notre Dame relishes being independent. You talk to any Notre Dame fan, any Notre Dame grad, and they love the fact that Notre Dame is independent. There's a lot of perks as to why Notre Dame is independent. They are known as a national brand. Notre Dame fans and grads and even Notre Dame officials believe that if Notre Dame were to join a conference, it would sort of regionalize Notre Dame, and they don't want that. They want Notre Dame to be a national brand, an international brand. So joining a conference in their minds means they would be labeling themselves as a regional brand. Another perk for Notre Dame being independent is they can make their own schedule. If you look at the SEC, they have 4 home games and 4 road games, and the conference figures out where those games and when those games are going to be played. Notre Dame doesn't have to worry about that. Most of the time, Notre Dame has a favorable schedule because they're independent and they can schedule whoever they want. Now, they are affiliated with the ACC, so they schedule heavy ACC, but they still get to pick out the teams that they get to schedule. Of course, they don't get to pick home game after home game after home game. They do have to throw in some road games, but for the most part, Notre Dame is in control of their own scheduling as far as choosing who they're going to play and when they're going to play. Big time perk in being independent. The next thing is, which I kind of talked about it, is they can't be told what to do by a conference. Not just scheduling, but a lot of things. They're not held down by any type of bylaws, by any type of rules, anything like that by joining a conference, and Notre Dame likes that. So that's the big thing about being independent for Notre Dame. Now, if Notre Dame were to join a conference, I think it would be the ACC. There is a reason why Notre Dame allowed that clause in their contract with the ACC where it says if Notre Dame were to join a conference before 2036, it has to be the ACC. That wasn't random wording. That wasn't Notre Dame missing that clause. Oops, we didn't see that. We already signed. No, there's a reason why they allowed that clause. If Notre Dame joins the conference before 2036, it's going to be the ACC. The ACC has kissed the rear end of Notre Dame, and I'm not talking down on the ACC. That's actually what you need to do because Notre Dame's a big, big brand. If they were to join the ACC, that would bring the value of the ACC through the roof. So the ACC is doing what they're supposed to do. But before they join a conference, Notre Dame is seeking a $75 million a year payout. Notre Dame has come out and said, hey, if we can get the $75 million a year, we are staying independent. But if they can't reach that, or if the ACC can blow their minds with a new TV contract, then Notre Dame will join the ACC, not the Big Ten. But the biggest question is, can Notre Dame get to the playoffs on a Big Ten schedule? Is that one of the reasons why they haven't joined the Big Ten? Because let's face it, it is an easier path to the playoffs in the ACC. The 1 year that Notre Dame was a full-time member in football in a conference was the ACC in 2020. And what happened? They made the playoffs. They didn't even win the ACC championship game. They still made the playoffs. It is what it is. I'm not trash talking the ACC, but the path to the playoffs is much easier if you have an ACC schedule and not a Big Ten or an SEC schedule. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not trash talking Notre Dame. I'm not looking down at Notre Dame. I think that's pretty smart, actually. You do want the easiest path to get to the playoffs. So I think that's a smart decision by Notre Dame. But thinking in the future, if the Big Ten and the SEC do indeed get to their magic number and they decide to split off from the NCAA, create their own playoffs and national championship, nobody else is invited, even Notre Dame. Hey, Notre Dame, if you're not part of the Big Ten or the SEC, you're not invited to our playoffs. We don't care if you're a national brand, don't care about your independence, you have to join a conference. If it comes down to that, I am convinced that Notre Dame would join the SEC, which makes no sense because academically, culturally, geographically, regionally, Notre Dame fits much, much better into the Big Ten over the SEC. But Notre Dame's hatred for Michigan and the Big Ten is so deeply embedded that I am 100% that if it came down to that scenario, Notre Dame would actually join the SEC. They'd make a crap ton of money. They wouldn't have to bite the bullet and join the Big Ten and have to be a member of the same conference as Michigan. That they would definitely not like that at all. I mean, that is a big time reason why they're not a part of the Big Ten. So if they join the SEC, they wouldn't have to do that. They would have to swallow a little bit of pride, but they wouldn't have to swallow as much pride as if they joined the Big Ten. That would be a much more bigger deal for Notre Dame to have to join the Big Ten. They do not want to do that. So if it came down to those two conferences, Notre Dame would join the SEC. I am convinced of that. So after looking into everything, yes, I am convinced that Notre Dame will never, ever join the Big Ten, even with the kind of money that the Big Ten is offering. So now it's your turn. You let me know in the comments section, after hearing the case that I've given you as far as Notre Dame not joining the Big Ten, do you think that Notre Dame will ever join the Big Ten? Or do you now agree with me that Notre Dame will never ever join the Big Ten? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.